Feel the waves cut through me, hypnotized.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Brady, I'm a Friday streamer. I basically stream a bunch of video games. I stream art, as you can see here, and I do programming as well. Um, again, I recently started 3D modeling, but I'm gonna wait until I'm proficient at more familiar with the UI of Blender, basically. And once I'm more familiar with Blender's UI, and then I'll be more comfortable to start streaming 3D modeling, stuff like that. Other than that, yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, there you go. And actually, let me load up the file real quick. I forgot to do that. Oh, come on. Here we go. Now I remember where I was at. Okay. Where is that with this? Okay. Okay, I'm trying to remember where I was at with this. So I think I started working on the actual. It completed that, and then yes, I was gonna start on there on the skin. All right. All right. Yep. All right. Now I remember. Alrighty, and let me just. All right. Let me now start. We got some caving incidents. All right. Of course. All right. After to be fatal. Hello. Welcome. How are you today? All right. Here we go. Alright, come on. I could do this. Shit. Woofers. Hello, how are you? How you been today? Yo. Alright, come on, I can do this, I can do this. Alright, there we go. Doesn't look right. Probably it's best to make it have it like that. Maybe like that. Nah, simpler the better. Alright, there we go. Okay. Dress. There we go. Alright, there we go. Okay. It's gonna be black and green. Hi. My day was bit hectic. Work was busy, but at least I'm home. Um, unfortunately, this morning, unfortunately, got a parking ticket. It was only $50, so I had to pay it right away. Turns out, the front of my apartment is not a place. I can't park there. I just legally can't park there, apparently. So yeah. So I'm forced to park in the back parking lot. I explained to my landlord the situation, and I just told them, hey, I need even though we don't have any assigned parking, I need assigned parking. I need a parking spot. So my landlord is working on that, and I'm gonna talk to some people about what's going on. So that's pretty much it. And luckily, my car was about to be towed. Good thing I caught it in time, and yeah. No, don't eat my art. No. I at least say I saved my car from being towed. So there's that. I continue the video and continue my art. All right. All right. Gonna take this. and then boop. And then I can add another. And ooh, there we go. All right, there we go. Fun. Oh no, no, don't say that. Funeral. Why is fun and funeral fun? Oh my god, stop. No, no. Meep meep. Jeep Jeep. I'm a beep. Honk. All right. All right. Let's see here. Oh, all right. And all right, let me reset my model real quick. All right. That scared the shit out of me. My tablet glitched out on me. Okay, don't want the light to be on a more sensitive to the light is on the coming towards the from the left. If we need black color. Yep. Traditional- Here's the thing: traditional art is better than digital art. Change my mind. Here's the thing: I started out with digital art actually. The way I did my digital art was basically I had a um a a drawing underlight, which basically is basically like it looks like a tablet, but it's actually used for like drawing over pages and whatnot. You know, it's something like it's usually used for like professional 2D animators who do the drafts on paper first and then do it digitally. That's how I did my digital art. I mean, that's how I did my traditional art first before I moved on to digital art. But Prover, I have a question for you. And well, all of chat, I do have questions for everyone. Uh, do you prefer traditional art or digital art? And do yours, like, do you like drawing traditional better, or do you like doing digital better? Traditional? Alright. Alright, solid answer. And I'm proud of all of you, my Blitzies. Oh shit. You first. Bye. Have fun. What the fuck? How'd I? Pen. Oof. Oh shit! I completely forgot. To unmute the goddamn desk audio. Fuck! How long has it been now? Me. All right. Oh, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Sure. Working on multiple platforms. All right. The actual that might be a blocking mine. That. Could make it. If it's too small, but all right. I can see. All right. There we go.
Winding paths deep underground. The cave was dark, the air damp, and the ground uneven. Every step had to be careful, but that was part of the fun. They crawled through narrow spaces, climbed over jagged rock formations, and pressed forward, eager to see what was around each bend. The deeper they went, the more difficult it became. But nobody was worried. They were focused, but they weren't afraid. That changed in an instant. Andy was ahead of the group when they reached a steep, upward-sloping passage. He was focused on climbing, thinking about where to put his hands and feet. He didn't see the crack beneath him, a deep, narrow crevice,
Oh
barely
no.
wide enough to fit a child. It was almost invisible against the rock floor. One wrong step, and the ground disappeared beneath him. His body fell straight down, wedging itself into the crack so tightly that there was no room to move. His shoulders barely fit. His arms were pinned awkwardly. The jagged stone tore into his skin. He tried to breathe, but the rock pressed against his ribs, making it hard to expand his chest. He could barely turn his head. Phil was only a few feet away. He rushed to help, grabbing at Andy, trying to pull him out, but it was useless. The space was too tight. There was nothing to grip, nothing to shift. Every attempt only made things worse, scraping Andy's body against the rock and causing him more pain. Phil called for the others to get help. They scrambled toward the cave entrance, leaving father and son alone in the crushing darkness. Time passed slowly. There was nothing to do but wait. The cave was cold, and the position Andy was stuck in made everything worse. He couldn't move his arms. His legs dangled beneath him with no support. The rock walls felt like they were pressing in harder every second. Every breath was shallow. The pressure on his chest was constant, making it feel like he was suffocating even though there was air around him. The cold crept into his muscles, stealing his strength. When the first rescuers arrived, they saw immediately how bad the situation was. The crevice wasn't just tight, it was crushing. Andy was wedged at an awkward angle, making it impossible to pull him out in a straight line. He couldn't move forward or backward. The team brought in more help, including experienced cavers from the Iowa Grotto. They examined the crevice, trying to figure out a plan. The first idea was to get a support under Andy, something to prevent him from slipping deeper. They wedged boards beneath him, giving him a little bit of stability. But stability wasn't the problem. Getting him out was. The rescuers worked for hours. They tried shifting his body, adjusting his position, and testing different ways to pull him free. Nothing worked. Andy's body was giving out. He had been trapped for 12 hours. His limbs were numb, his breathing shallow. The cold was draining his energy. Hypothermia was setting in. The rescuers
I
moved
can't
him, running
even
out of
imagine
time,
myself
then
in
John
that kind of
Hackman arrived.
situation.
He was a seasoned cave explorer, someone who had been in dangerous situations before. He took one look at Andy and realized what the others had been too afraid to admit. They were trying to pull him in the wrong direction. Every attempt so far had been focused on pulling Andy up or back. That wasn't going to work. The cave had him in an unbreakable grip. There was only one way out. He had to go deeper first. It was a terrifying idea. Andy was barely holding on, and now the plan was to push him further down. But there was no other choice. If they didn't move him soon, he wouldn't survive the cold. The plan was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. The idea was to remove the wooden board that was keeping Andy from slipping further into the crevice, allowing gravity to pull him deeper. Once he was lower, they would attempt to pull him forward and then up. It sounded straightforward, but in reality, it was a gamble with his life. The risks were severe. If he slipped too far, they might not be able to reach him at all. The crevice was already impossibly narrow, and if he sank beyond their grasp, there would be no way to pull him back. Worse, if the rock shifted or the rescuers lost control for even a moment, they could make his situation irreversibly worse. Moving him in any direction was dangerous. His body had been compressed in that space for hours, his limbs stiff and weak from the cold. There was no guarantee that once they moved him, he wouldn't become even more stuck in an even worse position. But there was no time left. Andy was fading, and hypothermia was creeping in fast. His breathing had slowed, his responses were weak, and if they didn't act now, his body might shut down completely. The cave was not going to give him back without a fight. The rescuers positioned themselves carefully. One held his wrist, the only point of control they had over his movement. Another crouched below, ready to guide him through the tightest point of the crevice. They knew they had to do this in a single controlled movement. If they hesitated, they could lose him. Slowly, they pulled the board away. Gravity took over. Andy's body dropped further into the crack. For a moment, the entire cave seemed to hold its breath. If he had gone too far, it was over. If his position shifted the wrong way, he might become completely unreachable. Then, before the situation could spiral into catastrophe, the rescuers yanked him forward with everything they had. The tension snapped. Andy slid free. The moment he was pulled from the crevice, relief washed over the rescuers like a flood. His body was weak, nearly unresponsive, but he was psyched out. But the ordeal wasn't over. He had been trapped for hours, and his body had endured extreme stress. His legs barely functioned. His muscles, deprived of movement and warmth for so long, barely responded to his commands. The climb back up was slow and grueling. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he kept moving. By the time he emerged from the cave, he had been trapped for 12
Alright, now I can do
hours.
some
Looking back,
shadows.
it's hard to believe he survived. Andy had been wedged in an almost impossible position, unable to move, barely able to breathe, slowly losing body heat. Every standard rescue attempt had failed, and his condition was rapidly deteriorating. In the end, the only way to save him was to push him further into the problem before pulling him out. It was a move that could have gone horribly wrong. If they had waited even an hour longer, the cold might have taken him. If their final attempt had failed, there would have been no second chance. But the risk paid off. And that's what makes this rescue so unbelievable. On December 24th, 2002, Cedar City, Utah. In the common room of a group home for troubled teenage girls, an announcement was about to be made. The girls, some fidgeting with anticipation, others barely paying attention, were about to hear the details of a special Christmas Eve field trip. The large group consisted of a trio of 3 girls named Ker, Kylie, and Megan. Ker sat near the back of the room, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. She had never been superstitious, never one to put much weight on gut feelings. But as soon as the counselor revealed their destination, a cold weight settled deep in her chest. Bloomington Cave. The moment she heard the name, her instinct screamed at her. Something terrible was going to happen. But when she tried to express her concern to the staff, they dismissed it as paranoia. "It'll be fine," they said. "We've done this before." Keir was unconvinced. Across the room, her friend Kylie was chatting with Megan, excited about the upcoming adventure. The two were inseparable, a bond forged in a place where trust was hard to come by. Kylie was well-liked, kind, funny, always able to lift the spirits of even the most withdrawn girls. But Kerr couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was a mistake, and she was right. Nestled in the remote deserts of southern Utah, Bloomington Cave is one of the most extensive and notorious cave systems in the state. It is a labyrinth of twisting tunnels, narrow crawl spaces, and sudden deadly drop-offs. Since its discovery, Bloomington Cave had been a magnet for adventure seekers and caving enthusiasts. But not all of them made it out. For decades, experienced cavers warned that this cave was too unstable, too unpredictable. The loose rock, the sheer drops, and the utter lack of visibility made it a high-risk environment, especially for the untrained. In the 1950s, the Utah Dixie Grotto Caving Club, a team of professionals dedicated to cave preservation and safety, deemed Bloomington Cave too dangerous to remain open. Their recommendation was drastic. The cave should be sealed permanently. Authorities listened at first. Explosives were used to collapse the entrances, but within months, local thrill seekers pried open new access points. A second attempt was made to seal it in 1954. It failed just as miserably. By the time the 1970s rolled around, another caving club attempted to properly map the system. They made it 3,000 feet in
What the
before
fuck's
they
going
abandoned
on?
the
My
project,
fucking hell.
citing
Hold on.
unacceptable
Hold on real
risks.
quick. I gotta do.
Then, in the late 1990s, after 3 years of careful mapping, the cave's true size was revealed: over 7,100 feet of twisting, deadly terrain. It was a cave that swallowed the light, a place where mistakes were permanent. And on Christmas Eve of 2002, Kylie and her group stepped into its depths. The van rattled down an unpaved desert road, jostling the 15 girls and 5 counselors inside. For most of the ride, the group chattered excitedly, eager to escape the monotony of the group home. But as they pulled into the barren parking lot near Bloomington Cave's south entrance, an eerie silence fell over the group. The entrance was nearly invisible, just a dark hole in the earth. Years of failed blasting attempts left it jagged and uninviting.
My
To get
tablet.
inside, they would have to crawl.
My tablet glitched the fuck out. I hate it when that happens. I think something odd is happening with Windows and how it treats the actual pen feature, the touch pen feature. Is my model gonna? God damn it! Start. Fucking hell. Hold on real quick. I have to do some drastic measures real quick. And open up my... Hold on real quick. Fucking hell. This is... Start. Alright. Alright. And then... I hate when this happens. And my tablet decided to glitch out in the middle of the stream. It glitches out like every I kind of use the tablet as both like the drawing tablet and the third screen just in case. And it does glitch out if I leave it on for too long. I think it's going to do with both the driver and Windows. Driver's updated, so there should be no problem with the driver, actually. I think it's an issue with Windows.
Before entering, the counselors divided them into 2 groups. The plan was simple. They would move in single file, with a counselor leading the way and another at the back. The girls were instructed to hold hands to avoid getting separated. Then they went in. The air inside was suffocating, stagnant and damp. The walls pressed in from all sides, forcing the group to crouch and shuffle forward. The darkness was absolute. Without their meager lights, they would be blind, and even with them, they could barely see. The group had only 8 light sources between 20 people, 5 headlamps for the counselors, and 3 handheld flashlights shared among 15 girls. The rest had nothing. They were moving by touch alone, feeling their way through the darkness.
As a
like
disaster waiting to
blindfolded
happen.
children. Kylie and Megan held onto each other tightly. At first, they whispered jokes to keep their nerves at bay. But as the tunnels grew narrower, their laughter faded. They squeezed through tight corridors, crawled over jagged boulders, and navigated slippery slopes. The cave seemed endless, wrapping around itself in a maze of stone. The deeper they went, the more the walls closed in. Then, suddenly, the space widened. They had reached the big room. The big room was a deceptive sanctuary, an illusion of safety wrapped in complete darkness. It was the largest chamber in the cave, an expanse of empty space where the walls and ceiling stretched high above, unseen but present, massive, silent, and suffocating. The group hesitated, directionless beams scattered against the cavern walls. It should have felt safer here. There was room to stand, to stretch after hours of crouching and crawling. But the danger was invisible, hidden beneath the very ground they trusted with their weight. Just inches beyond their hesitant footsteps, the earth fell away. A sheer 150-foot drop yawned open in the darkness, a void so absolute that even light refused to reveal its depth. There were no railings, no warning signs, no natural barriers to stop a single misplaced step from becoming fatal. The uneven floor, littered with loose rock and unstable ground, was a death trap disguised as solid footing. And they had no idea. The group shuffled forward cautiously, their bodies moving by instinct, relying on their hands, their knees, the hesitant pressure of their feet to feel for stability. With so few lights to go around, the girls without them were effectively blind, guided only by the trembling hands of those beside them. Kylie was among them. Something had shifted in her. Megan noticed it first. Kylie, always fearless, always steady, was shaking. Her breathing had quickened, shallow and uneven, a faint trembling sound lost beneath the scuffle of boots against rock. Her grip had tightened, her fingers digging into Megan's wrist like a vice. Then the inevitable happened. The mistake. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a reckless leap or a foolish decision. It was simple, effortless. A brief loss of balance, a single foot shifting onto unstable rock, a moment of gravity asserting its dominance. The
Goofers.
stone beneath Kylie
Big
dropped,
goofers.
and she was gone. There was no time to react, no time to grab, no time to scream. Only the gut-wrenching sound of rocks tearing away, tumbling into the abyss, bouncing violently off the jagged walls below. A hollow, echoing sound that stretched into eternity. And then, finally, the worst noise of all, the sound of impact. A sickening, fleshy thud. Everything stopped. The girls froze, their breath held captive in their chests. For a few terrible seconds, there was only silence, the kind of silence that suffocates, that grips the body in absolute paralysis. Then the screaming began. The beams of their flashlights jerked downward, their hands trembling so violently that the light wavered against the cavern walls. At first, the drop was bottomless, a void too black to comprehend. But then, far below, the weak glow of their flashlights found what was left of Kylie. She lay motionless in the darkness, limbs sprawled at unnatural angles, half buried beneath a pile of fallen rock. One of the counselors broke from his trance and bolted toward the entrance, his frantic footfalls echoing through the cave as he raced to find help. The others scrambled to descend, grasping for anything stable as they attempted to reach her. Every movement was laced with desperation, their bodies trembling as they clung to the cave walls, trying to reach the unmoving figure below. As they drew closer, the panic in their breath turned to grim silence. There was no need to check for a pulse, no need for CPR. The truth was undeniable. Kylie was gone. It took an entire day for rescue crews to recover her body. When they finally emerged from the cave, the Christmas Eve sky had turned dark. The lights from emergency vehicles cast long, flickering shadows across the desert floor. Back at the group home, the devastating news was delivered to Kylie's adoptive parents. They were shattered, and they wanted answers. Shockingly, the group home refused to accept responsibility. The director claimed that Kylie's death was not due to the fall, but to an undiagnosed heart condition. He stated that she would have died no matter where she was that day. But the official autopsy told a different story. Cause of death, blunt force trauma, and liver lacerations. Both injuries were caused by the fall, not her heart. And then came the final revelation. The group had 1/6 of the necessary light sources. They had been moving blind. The group home was never held accountable. No lawsuits, no charges, nothing.
That's
And yet,
sickening.
Kylie was still gone. Kerr had known. She had felt it in her bones, but no one had listened. And Kylie never made...
You know, the only reason why there's no lawsuit, most likely the case, is that they signed away their rights to sue them. Most likely the case. In a forced arbitration agreement.
it out of that cave. Nestled in the serene wilderness of Gilchrist County, Florida, Devil's Ear Spring is both a wonder and a danger. On October 9th, 1992, R.D. Mulholland and Alan Jonaschadis embarked on what they planned as a routine exploration. Both men were skilled and certified cave divers, with dozens of successful dives under their belts. However, even the most seasoned professionals can misjudge the delicate balance of risk and preparation. This dive would push them beyond their limits and end in a tragedy that would haunt the diving community for years to come. The morning began like any other. The sun filtered through the trees surrounding Devil's Ear Spring. Mulholland and Jonaschadis stood at the edge of the spring, discussing their dive plan. It was a straightforward mission: navigate the main passage using 2-stage tanks and Techna scooters. Their goal was to keep the dive simple, allowing Alan to practice scooter handling without the added pressure of complex navigation. Mulholland had one concern: neither of them had been diving for at least a month. Rust in their skills was a minor worry, but they decided to proceed with confidence. After double-checking their equipment, they entered the water, descending into the depths of the spring. The first stretch of the dive was smooth. The permanent guideline along the main passage provided...
If you don't have enough experience with that particular caves or underwater caves, then don't go.
a clear
Don't take any technical caving challenges unless you are experienced in it.
route, and the crystal clear water offered excellent visibility. But soon, the first complication arose. Mulholland's scooter malfunctioned, leaving him to rely solely on fin propulsion. He signaled to Alan, suggesting they could abort the dive. Alan, eager to continue, insisted they press on. Reluctantly, Mulholland agreed to continue the dive. He weighed the situation carefully. The plan was already simple. The conditions were calm, and the guideline was intact and easy to follow. It seemed safe enough, and Alan was eager to gain more experience with the scooter. Mulholland followed close behind. His eyes were constantly fixed on Alan as he handled the device. At first, the scooter seemed cumbersome in Alan's grasp as its movements appeared awkward and unsteady. But as they progressed, his handling improved. The cave grew darker as they ventured deeper. Light from the surface was nothing but a memory now, and their dive lights created sharp, focused beams. The cave's walls started closing in, pressing them into a narrow corridor. The water here was cold and heavy, and the slight current brushed past them like an unseen force urging them to turn back. Mulholland couldn't help but notice Alan's position in the water. He seemed a little lower than was ideal, his body close to the cave floor. Small puffs of silt rose from beneath him, trailing in his wake. Mulholland made a mental note, but decided not to intervene. Alan appeared to be adjusting to the scooter's pull. They pressed on. Eventually, the passage widened slightly, only to taper again.
Why do people take unnecessary risks?
The lips. This constriction was infamous among cave divers. The opening was tight, and the current intensified here, pushing against anyone attempting to pass through. For those unprepared, the lips could turn from a simple obstacle into a dangerous choke point. Mulholland knew this section well. It required precision, control, and composure, qualities Alan would need to demonstrate with the scooter. The atmosphere shifted as they approached. The once steady current grew stronger, tugging at them like invisible hands. Silt and small particles swirled in the water, carried by the flow. Mulholland stopped and turned to Alan, signaling with his light. He asked if his partner was ready to proceed. Alan responded confidently, his light flashing a reassuring "okay." Despite the response, Mulholland couldn't shake a slight unease. He pushed it aside and took the lead. positioning himself for the narrow passage ahead. The current pressed against him with increasing force, turning even small movements into a challenge. He used deliberate, controlled kicks, inching forward through the constriction. On the other side, the current eased slightly and 𝙂𝙗𝙣 turned back to watch Alan follow. At first, everything seemed fine. Alan approached cautiously, the beam from his light steady and focused. But as he entered the lips, the scooter's power became evident. Its propeller created a turbulence that disturbed the already forceful current, and Alan seemed to struggle with maintaining control. 𝙂𝙗𝙣's chest tightened as he watched Alan's light begin to wobble, the beam shaking erratically as if the scooter were pulling him in unintended directions. The glow became a frantic dance of light on the walls before it suddenly disappeared entirely. For a moment, 𝙂𝙗𝙣 froze. His mind raced through possibilities. Was Alan stuck? Had he lost control of the scooter? Was he injured? The seconds felt like hours as 𝙂𝙗𝙣 hovered in the water, trying to process what had just happened. 𝙂𝙗𝙣's instincts took over. He swam back toward the constriction, the current now a relentless force working against him. Each kick of his fins felt like a monumental effort as he pushed forward, his breathing quickening with exertion. His light swept the tunnel, bouncing off the jagged walls and uneven floor. But there was no sign of Alan. The constriction felt tighter this time, the passage more oppressive. The strong flow pushed against 𝙂𝙗𝙣's chest and face, making progress
Hello, how are
agonizingly
you?
slow. Finally, he emerged on the other side, only to find nothing but darkness and empty water. Alan was gone. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 forced himself to stay calm, drawing on years of training. He began a systematic search, his light moving methodically across the walls and floor. He looked for bubbles, disturbed silt, or any sign of movement, anything that might lead him to his partner. The cave, which had moments ago felt serene and beautiful, now seemed alien and menacing. The silence pressed against him, broken only by the faint sound of his own labored breathing. Just as the first threads of panic began to creep in, he saw it. A faint, flickering glow emanating from a side passage. Relief flooded his system, propelling him toward the light. It was coming from a tunnel leading toward Devil's Eye Spring. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 kicked harder, closing the distance as quickly as he could. But as he drew closer, relief turned to dread. The light was steady now, illuminating the figure of Alan. He was motionless, floating in an unnatural position. His back was arched, and his regulator hung loosely from his mouth. The sight hit 𝙂𝙗𝙣 like a physical blow. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 reached Alan and immediately began assessing the situation. Alan's body was limp, his face pale and unresponsive. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 checked his air supply. There was plenty left. Alan's tanks and gear appeared intact, but something had gone terribly wrong. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 knew he had no time to waste. The effort to bring Alan to the surface would be immense, and his own air supply was limited. Carefully, he removed Alan's tanks and accessories, lightening the load to make transport possible. Each movement had to be precise. One wrong step trapped them both in the narrow confines of the cave. Grabbing hold of Alan, 𝙂𝙗𝙣 began the slow, grueling ascent. The current, which had been a nuisance before, now felt like an unrelenting enemy. It pushed against them, threatening to drag them deeper into the cave. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 gritted his teeth and fought back, his muscles burning with the effort. Every kick of his fins sent shockwaves of pain through his legs, but he didn't stop. His mind was singularly focused on reaching the surface. The tunnel seemed endless, its walls pressing in on all sides. 𝙂𝙗𝙣's breathing grew heavier, each inhalation feeling more labored than the last. As they neared the entrance, the first hints of daylight appeared, a faint glow in the distance. 𝙂𝙗𝙣 pushed harder, summoning every ounce of strength he had left. Breaking through the surface, he shouted for help. Nearby divers and emergency responders rushed to assist, pulling Alan from the water. A physician and EMT on the scene began resuscitation efforts immediately. Their movements were precise and practiced, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Despite their best efforts, it was too late. Alan had been underwater for too long. His lifeless body lay on the shore, with everyone else devastated. An analysis of the accident revealed several contributing factors. Alan's inexperience with the scooter was a significant issue. Using a scooter requires precise buoyancy control and the ability to multitask under pressure. In the tight confines of the lips, Alan likely overexerted himself, leading to a buildup of carbon dioxide in his system. This can cause confusion, panic, and impaired judgment, deadly conditions in a cave. Another critical factor was the absence of a guideline to the surface. Although the permanent line provided a route through the cave, it was positioned several feet up the wall, away from the flow of the current.
Oof.
For a disoriented diver struggling with CO2 poisoning, this small detail could make all the difference. Alan may have lost sight of the line and mistakenly followed the current into the side passage. 𝙂𝙚, devastated by the loss of his friend, shared his story in the hope that others might learn from it. On October 9th, 2004, the crisp air of the Colorado evening bit at the skin of 𝙂𝙚 Franz Hankins, and 𝙂𝙚 𝘂𝙚 as they made their way toward the entrance of Narrow's cave. The cave loomed before them, a dark void that seemed to breathe with stillness. For Ryan, the leader of the group and an experienced spelunker, this was just another thrilling challenge. For 𝙂𝙚, the novice, it was both terrifying and exhilarating, a step into the unknown. Franz, at 35 years old and physically sturdy, had enough experience to feel confident but not complacent. They joked lightly as they strapped on their helmets and adjusted their headlamps. Inside the cave, the world changed. The outside sounds of rustling leaves and distant wildlife were replaced by the muffled echoes of their movements. Each step was deliberate, the uneven rock beneath their boots demanding careful attention. The walls seemed to press closer as they descended deeper into the earth. By the time they reached the top of Spring Canyon, the narrow passages gave the impression that the cave was alive, breathing, and watching. The crawlway ahead was tight, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through on their stomach. Ryan went first, his movements smooth and practiced, his breathing steady. Franz followed, grunting slightly as his larger frame scraped against the rocks. 𝙂𝙚 lingered at the back, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to crawl into the constricted passage. As Franz wriggled forward, he felt the rough walls press against his shoulders and chest. He pressed further, his fingers brushing against a loose rock jutting from the side of the passage. He noticed the loose stone protruding slightly from the side. Instinctively, he reached out to steady himself and pulled on the rock for leverage. It was a fatal mistake. The rock resisted for a moment before giving way with a low, ominous rumble. Suddenly, the ceiling above him groaned. Before he could react, massive boulders dislodged and came crashing down. The impact was deafening, reverberating through the confined space like a thunderclap. Dust and debris exploded around him, blinding him and choking the air. The boulder slammed into his upper body, pinning his head and left arm against the wall with brutal force. Franz let out a guttural scream as the weight of the boulder lifted his lower body off the ground, contorting him into a horrifying position. Dirt and small stones cascaded over him, partially burying his face. He gasped for air, his chest heaving against the unyielding rock. Behind him, 𝙂𝙚 froze in terror, her wide eyes darting between Franz and the falling debris. She screamed, her voice high-pitched and trembling. Ryan, now on the other side of the crawlway, whipped around at the sound. His stomach dropped as he saw Franz wedged in the passage, his head barely visible beneath the cascade of rubble. He called out his name, and Franz groaned in response, his voice muffled by the dirt. 𝙂𝙚 scrambled forward, her hands trembling as she tried to clear the debris from around. Ryan quickly assessed the situation, his mind racing. Franz was alive, but in serious trouble. The boulder had wedged his head and arms tightly against the wall, and the debris around was suffocating him. They needed to get help. Ryan turned and began the grueling crawl through another route in the cave. He knew the cave really well and had memorized all its exit points. Every inch felt like a mile, his arms and legs screaming in protest as he dragged himself through the tight...
Honestly, as intriguing as mysterious a cave would be, I don't think it's worth risking your life.
Passages. The sharp rocks scraped against his elbows and knees, but he barely noticed the pain. His mind was fixed on one goal, reaching the surface. When Ryan finally emerged from the cave, he quickly considered his options. Gasping for breath, he pulled out his phone and dialed Mike Frazier, a seasoned cave rescuer. He quickly explained the situation, describing Franz's position and the severity of the collapse. Mike didn't hesitate and was on his way immediately. Grabbing his gear and a hydraulic jack, he called for additional help while driving to the cave. He knew the risks all too well. Time was against them. and every moment counted. When Mike arrived at the parking area, Ryan was waiting, his face pale and drawn. Mike and Ryan reached the crawlway where Franz was trapped. The sight was grim. Franz's face was pale and streaked with dirt. Pinned beneath the crushing weight of the boulder, Franz's body was failing him. His breathing grew shallow, each gasp a desperate fight against the unrelenting pressure on his chest. The numbness in his arm crept steadily toward his fingers, and his legs, suspended awkwardly in the air, began to tremble with fatigue. Blood rushed to his head, leaving him lightheaded and dizzy. The cold of the cave seeped into his bones, draining what little strength he had left. He tried to move, to shift even an inch, but the unyielding rock held him in place, mocking his efforts. His voice, once strong and commanding, was now barely a whisper as he called out for help. Darkness tugged at the edges of his vision, and for a moment, he felt the terrifying pull of unconsciousness. 𝙂𝙗 was still by his side, her hands raw and bleeding from her futile attempts to free him. Mike told them all to stay calm, with his voice steady. He assessed the situation quickly, his experienced eyes scanning the unstable ceiling and the boulder pinning Franz. Mike began digging with his hands, pulling away the dirt and debris from around Franz's head. The passage was so tight that he had to drag the debris back through the crawl to a small chamber 15 feet away. Each trip was exhausting, but he worked tirelessly, his muscles burning with effort. After several trips, Mike uncovered Franz's left hand, bruised and limp. He kept digging, eventually exposing Franz's helmet, which was crushed against the wall. The sides of the helmet were buckling under the pressure of the boulder. With great care, Mike unbuckled the chin strap and removed the helmet, allowing Franz to breathe more easily. Ryan joined in, grabbing Franz's legs and pulling. Franz screamed in agony, his voice echoing through the crawlway, but his upper body remained pinned. The ceiling groaned ominously, sending chills down their spines. They knew they were running out of time. By 11 p.m., additional rescuers arrived, their faces grim but determined. They brought jacks, 2x4s, and other shoring materials. The team worked quickly, bracing the unstable ceiling and positioning the jack under the boulder. Mike extended the jack slowly, the creaking sound filling the confined space. Inch by inch, the boulder lifted. Ryan and another rescuer grabbed Franz's legs and pulled with all their strength. With a sickening pop, Franz's upper body came free. As Franz was dragged out, the passage collapsed again, burying the jack and filling the crawlway with debris. The rescuers stared at the rubble in stunned silence. They had escaped disaster by mere seconds. Freed from the boulder, Franz was in shock and was drifting into an unconscious state. His arm was swollen and discolored, hanging limp at his side. The rescuers worked quickly, wrapping him in a thermal blanket and placing his arm in a makeshift sling. After several minutes, Franz's color began to return, and he started to regain feeling in his fingers. The group moved carefully, belaying Franz down the breakdown climbs in Spring Canyon. Each crawl was a grueling challenge, the tight passages forcing them to remove Franz's sling so he could maneuver through. Just after midnight, they met a team of rescuers with a sked litter. Franz, too weak to continue on his own, was strapped into the litter. The rescuers dragged and carried him through the remaining crawls, their bodies pushed to the limit. Finally, they reached walking passage. Franz, determined to walk the last stretch, climbed out of the litter. His legs wobbled beneath him, but he pressed on, his companions supporting him. At 2 a.m., they emerged from the cave. Franz's wife was waiting, tears streaming down her face as she embraced him. He was alive and had merely escaped death. It was an early Saturday morning, July 18th, 1998, when Craig Douglas, his sister Jessica Douglas, and their friends Buster Miller and Jennifer Russell arrived at the entrance of Keyhole Cave. The air was filled with excitement, the forest surrounding the cave peaceful, the kind of morning that made them eager for adventure. This wasn't their first time here. They had explored this 370-foot-long cave the previous year, but had turned back before reaching the bottom. This time, they were determined to conquer it and reach its depths. Keyhole Cave was notoriously tight, its passages winding and suffocating, where one has to squeeze, crawl, and twist their bodies into positions that are beyond human endurance. The deepest part of the cave lay 113 feet below the surface, and the final descent required navigating through a near impossible 1-foot-high crawl before reaching an 8-foot vertical drop. The four friends strapped on their headlamps, adjusted their knee pads, and began their descent. As they made their way through the damp, jagged tunnels, the world above disappeared. The temperature dropped, the air grew still, and the only sounds were their own breath and the occasional scrape of gear against rock. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. They inched their way through the twisting maze of tunnels, carefully squeezing through body-tight passages, their muscles burning from the constant strain. Eventually, they arrived at the infamous Paul's Pipe, the final narrow crawl leading to the last pit. This was a foot-high crawl. Craig took the lead. He exhaled deeply and began worming his way through Paul's pipe, feeling the unforgiving rock press against his ribs and hips. It was slow, agonizing work. With barely any room to move his arms, he used his legs to push forward, scraping against the damp stone. The passage led to the edge of the 8-foot pit, where he needed to carefully position himself before dropping down. He extended his legs toward the opening, searching for footing, when something went horribly wrong. His left foot got caught. A rock pinched his boot, preventing him from sliding forward. Annoyed, he shifted his weight, trying to free it, but as he moved, his right knee suddenly jammed between two jagged slabs of bedrock. Pain exploded through his leg. The slabs were loose, so they caught his leg even more, putting in more pressure from all sides. He gasped, heart pounding, trying to jerk his leg free. The movement only made it worse. The rock was clamped like a vice around his knee, the rough edges digging into his skin. He twisted, pulled, gritted his teeth. Nothing. He tried to breathe through the pain, but panic was already setting in. Then came an even worse realization. He was stuck in a dangerous position. His body was angled downward, with his weight pulling against his trapped leg. If he lost his strength and slipped, he would be left dangling over the pit, his knee taking the full force of his body weight. Sweat broke out on his forehead. His body was half dangling over the pit, his arms pinned by the tunnel walls. Every small movement sent fresh waves of pain shooting through his trapped leg. The rock was merciless, pressing tighter with each passing second, like it was swallowing him whole. His sister's voice came from behind, who quickly realized things had gotten out of hand. For the next 15 minutes, he fought to free himself. Miller crawled into the passage, trying to help, but there was almost no space to work. He grabbed Craig, trying to twist him free, but the position of his knee made it impossible. The more they struggled, the more swollen Craig's leg became. His breathing turned ragged. His arms started to tremble from the strain. His entire leg was on fire, the pressure making his knee feel like it was being crushed into dust. His position made things even worse, as all the blood flow was now moving towards his head. He was nauseous and in pain. He had to get upright before he passed out from exhaustion. Through sheer grit and desperation, he managed to twist his torso just enough to push himself into a more stable position. It was difficult, as now he had to use his remaining strength to keep his head and back up, but his leg was still wedged deep in the crevice. His heart pounded wildly. The cave felt smaller, tighter, and suffocating. They knew they needed help. Jennifer Russell was the fastest among them, so she was sent back up to the surface to call for a rescue team. She disappeared into the tunnels, leaving the others behind. Since Craig was finding it difficult to twist his body up, so the others tried stuffing clothing in the narrow space in order to give him some support. By now, it has been the longest night for them. When the rescuers arrived, Craig had been stuck for over 5 hours. The first team members squeezed their way down, assessing the situation. It was bad. Craig's leg was now visibly swollen. Blood circulation was cut off, and if they didn't get him out soon, he could lose the leg, or worse, his life. The narrowness of the cave made the rescue agonizingly slow. Only one person at a time could work on freeing him. They tried pulling, adjusting his position, lubricating the rock with water and vegetable oil. Nothing worked. Then came a new danger: the temperature. The cold rock was draining Craig's body heat. He started shivering uncontrollably. If he stayed like this too long, hypothermia would set in. Rescuers wrapped him in a space blanket, placed a carpet under his hips, and ran an electrical line into the cave to power a heat gun. It was the only thing keeping him from slipping into unconsciousness. As the night dragged on, something even worse happened. The air quality dropped. The rescuers began struggling to breathe. The oxygen levels had plummeted to 16.9%.
Jesus
They were
Christ.
slowly suffocating in the depths of the cave. It wasn't just dangerous from Craig now. Everyone was now on borrowed time. They had to bring in more oxygen as soon as possible before things got feral. A ventilation system was quickly rigged, and through hoses, fresh air was being pumped into the tunnels.
Yeah, I
barely
couldn't deal
keeping
with
them
caves.
alive,
I
but
would not
bringing
be
in
able to deal with
relief.
caves.
Now that the oxygen levels were up, the focus now was to get Craig out. It has now been over 30 hours. Craig remained trapped. His body was shutting down. His leg felt like it didn't even belong to him anymore, just a mass of pain and dead weight. The rescuers considered options. Since his position was so unnatural, they even considered breaking his leg and then pulling him out after adjusting the loose rocks. However, that only was their last resort. They planned out another way of getting Craig out. The rescuers chipped away at the rock with drills and air chisels, breaking away millimeter by millimeter. They worked in shifts, the confined space allowing only one person at a time to chisel away at the stone, imprisoning Craig's knee. The sound of the drill reverberated through the rock. Craig's breathing had turned shallow. His shivers had stopped, a terrifying sign that his body was reaching its limit. The hypothermia that had threatened him for hours was now tightening its grip, but the rescuers refused to let him slip away. They reminded him why he had to keep fighting. They reminded him of the light above ground, of the air that would fill his lungs without restriction, of the people waiting for him. He couldn't speak anymore. His lips were cracked, his throat raw from dehydration. But inside, he was listening. And then, finally, after all the drilling, there was space. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for one last desperate attempt. The rescuers couldn't reach till there, and now they passed the drill to Craig. They were betting all the odds on him. His fingers barely responded as he gripped it. After being trapped for more than 30 hours, it all came down to him mustering all his strength. His arms trembled, muscles burning with exhaustion. He was hanging partially over the pit. He pressed the drill against the rock, teeth clenched in pain as the vibrations rattled his entire body. His vision blurred. The cave spun around him, and then something shifted. For the first time in nearly 2 days, his leg moved. The resistance that had held him like an iron grip weakened. With the last ounce of strength he had left, he pulled, and his leg came free. It was 8:30 p.m.
Oh, thank God.
Sunday evening. The relief was overwhelming. Every nerve in his body screamed at once, his leg pulsing with fire as circulation returned. It felt like being burned from the inside out. His body collapsed against the stone. He had no energy left to move. The rescuers gripped him, holding him steady, letting him breathe, feel, and exist. The cave had finally let him go, but the nightmare wasn't over. His leg was ruined. It had been trapped for so long that circulation had barely returned. He couldn't walk on it. Every step was agony. With the help of rescuers, he crawled, climbed, and dragged himself inch by inch back toward the entrance. The journey took over 8 hours. At 9:15 a.m., Monday morning, after 43 hours underground, he finally emerged into the daylight. He was rushed to the hospital, where surgeons performed emergency procedures to save his damaged leg. It would take months to recover, but he had survived. Craig Douglas had faced the worst possible nightmare in Keyhole Cave and lived to tell the tale. On November 23, 2019, a group of 5 college students from Purdue University arrived at Valhalla Cave in Alabama, eager for an adventure. They had planned this trip for weeks, researching the cave, gathering their equipment, and ensuring they had the necessary permit to enter. Valhalla Cave was well known in caving communities, particularly for its massive 227-foot entrance pit, which required technical skill and proper gear to descend safely. For experienced cavers, it was an exciting challenge. For the unprepared, it was a death trap. Despite their enthusiasm, the group faced a significant problem upon arrival. Their longest rope was not long enough to reach the bottom. A proper descent would require a single rope long enough to cover the entire drop. But they only had shorter ropes. Instead of abandoning the attempt or seeking a more suitable rope, they made a decision that would prove fatal. They tied 2 ropes together using a double fisherman's knot. This knot is known for its strength, but it created a significant complication. The transition point, where the 2 ropes were joined, was just below the lip of the pit. Anyone rappelling down would have to stop mid-air, unclip from the upper rope, and reattach to the lower rope before continuing. Trevor Cole, 21, was the
Plus, tying 2 ropes together with the fisherman tie, when you're doing technical caving, pretty much what I can predict is that rope is going to become undone or snap.
Most confident of the group. He had some experience with passing knots while rappelling and felt sure he could handle the maneuver. His friends trusted his skill, and without further discussion, he volunteered to go first. He methodically checked his gear, harness secure, helmet strapped on, carabiner clipped, and rappel rack properly attached to the rope. Satisfied, he clipped in, leaned back, and began his descent into the yawning abyss. As he backed over the edge, gravity pulled him downward. The rope slid smoothly through his rappel rack, controlling his speed as he descended. The others watched from above. The entrance pit was a sheer vertical drop, its limestone walls stretching down into the void. Trevor's breathing was steady, his movements precise. The only sounds were the faint creaks of his harness, the soft scrape of rope against rock, and the distant trickle of water seeping through the cave walls. Trevor descended carefully, watching the walls of the pit as he went. The deeper he went, the narrower the light from the entrance above became. After about 30 feet, his headlamp caught the bright weave of the knot below him. It was time to prepare for the transition. Crossing a knot mid-rappel is a complex and dangerous maneuver. He needed to stop, secure himself, transfer his rappel device to the lower rope, and continue downward, all while hanging in open space with no solid footing. The key was to remain calm, follow the process step by step, and never rush. He had done this before in controlled settings, but this was different. This was not practice. He braced his feet against the smooth rock wall to steady himself, then locked off his rappel rack to prevent it from sliding further. His fingers moved with practiced precision as he unclipped from the upper rope. For a brief moment, he was entirely dependent on his positioning and grip to keep himself stable. The next step was to attach his rappel rack to the lower rope and shift his weight onto it. But something unexpected happened. The moment Trevor transferred his weight, everything went wrong. He felt a sudden, terrifying shift. The security he had expected was gone. His body lurched as the rope slipped free of his control.
Oof.
He had no time to react. There was no chance to grab for anything. He was in free fall. The air roared in his ears as he plummeted, the walls of the pit racing past in a dizzying blur. His mind had no time to process what was happening. His body tensed instinctively, but there was nothing he could do to stop the descent. For nearly 200 feet, he fell, his body accelerating toward the cavern floor below. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The force of the landing crushed bone and ruptured organs. His helmet, though designed for protection, could not absorb the sheer violence of the fall. He tried to move, but he couldn't. Above, the rest of the group stood in stunned horror. The moment had played out in seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Trevor had vanished into the darkness, and then there had been that terrible final sound, a distant, sickening impact. No one spoke, no one moved. Their minds refused to accept what had just happened. Then, one of them whispered his name. In response, there was complete silence. A second call, louder this time. Still, nothing. Fear gripped them. They wanted to help him, but they knew the truth. No one could survive a fall like that. And even if he had somehow lived, they had no safe way to reach him. Their gear was already stretched thin, and they had planned to share equipment between them. One of them
Shit, that's
fumbled
even
for their
worse.
phone, hands shaking, and dialed 911. The words came out in a breathless rush, explaining the horrific accident. The Chattanooga-Hamilton County Rescue Squad arrived within hours. By then, night had fallen completely, and the entrance to Valhalla Cave had become a black void in the earth. The rescuers moved quickly, their years of experience guiding their every action. They wasted no time setting up a proper rope system, securing each anchor with precision, and double-checking their gear before descending into the depths below. The first rescuer eased himself into the pit, his descent slow and methodical. The heavy silence of the cave was broken only by the sound of his breathing and the occasional scrape of metal against rock as he maneuvered downward. They knew what they were expecting, but that didn't make the discovery any easier. When they pulled Trevor's rope back up, their eyes immediately locked onto an alarming sight. His rappel rack was still attached, locked off exactly as he had set it before attempting to pass the knot. The implications were immediate and chilling. His equipment had not failed. The system had been secure, but something else had gone wrong. Further inspection revealed the grim truth. Trevor's harness remained intact, but his carabiner, The crucial link in his safety system was partially open. A small, almost imperceptible notch in the sleeve told a horrifying story. Under the force of his body weight, the carabiner had been forced open just enough to allow his harness to slip free. In that brief, terrible moment, while transitioning from one rope to another, his connection had failed. It wasn't a snapped rope. It wasn't a major oversight. It was a single mechanical failure, a cruel twist of fate that had sent him plummeting into the abyss. By the time rescuers reached the bottom, their worst fears were confirmed. Trevor lay motionless among the jagged rocks, his headlamp still emitting a faint glow, a haunting reminder of his final moments. There was no movement, no sign of life. The lead rescuer took a slow breath before pressing the radio to his lips. His voice, steady but heavy with the weight of the situation, crackled through the static. Victim located. Fatal injuries confirmed. Above ground, the words settled over Trevor's friends like a suffocating weight. They had known, deep down, what the outcome would be. But hearing it said aloud, final, unquestionable, was something else entirely. Trevor had been confident. He had been experienced. But in caving, experience does not eliminate risk. No amount of skill can erase the dangers that lurk beneath the surface. Sometimes, it takes just one mistake. Other times, it takes only a single unpredictable failure. Their group had made calculations. They had assessed the risks, but they had underestimated the hazards of tying two ropes together mid-pitch. They had overlooked the danger of placing the knot just below the lip of the drop. In the end, they had lost their friend to an accident no one could have foreseen. Valhalla Cave had taken another life, and the cave does not forgive mistakes. On November 23rd, 2006,
Mother
the morning
Nature.
began like any other, calm and uneventful. 𝙂𝙚𝙣𝙚 packed her gear carefully.
I say Mother Nature is strict and unforgiving, and for good reason.
Double-checking each item before placing it into her bag. She had gone over the list the night before. Helmet with a reliable headlamp, durable gloves to protect her hands from the rough cave walls, knee pads to cushion against hard surfaces, and an extra layer of clothing in case the cave was colder than expected. Everything seemed in order, yet an uneasy feeling sat in the pit of her stomach, a quiet but persistent anxiety that she couldn't shake. Her parents hadn't been thrilled about the trip. Caving wasn't a common hobby for a 17-year-old, and the idea of their daughter disappearing into the dark, winding tunnels of an underground
neck
cavern
crack.
filled them with concern. But she reassured them that her destination, Clay Cave, wasn't a dangerous cave. Leslie Lubachevsky and Tom Carroll, who were accompanying her on the trip, had chosen it specifically because of its reputation as an easy, beginner-friendly site. There were no deep drops, no dangerously narrow crawls, nothing that could pose a real threat. It was meant to be fun, a simple adventure. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun had fully risen as they drove toward Clay Cave. The conversation in the car was lively, filled with Leslie's enthusiastic stories of past caving trips and Tom's reminders of basic safety procedures. 𝙂𝙚 listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She had read about caving before, but hearing it from experienced guys made it feel more real. The drive took over an hour, winding through quiet back roads surrounded by dense trees. Finally, they arrived at the entrance to Clay Cave. It was smaller than she had expected, a dark, unassuming hole in the ground, partially concealed by tangled underbrush. The earth around it was damp, and the air carried the scent of wet stone and decaying leaves. They geared up, adjusting helmets and fastening straps. A final check ensured that headlamps were secured and functioning properly. Once everything was in place, they stepped forward into the gaping mouth of the cave. The change was immediate. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air shifted, cooler, heavier, carrying the faint scent of minerals and damp earth. Clay Cave was not large, but it required careful navigation. The passages twisted and narrowed, forcing them to crouch and squeeze through in places. The rock beneath their hands and feet was rough and uneven, worn down by time and water. Each step had to be placed with precision, ensuring that no sudden slip would send them tumbling onto the unforgiving stone below. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of their breath and the occasional scrape of boots against rock. About 50 feet inside, they reached a section that required canyoning, moving between two vertical walls by bracing hands
Oh
and feet
no.
against either side and inching forward. It was
Canyon. Shit. Yeah, no. I would have called Spider-Maning.
It was a technique that required balance and control, using pressure against the walls to stay suspended above the floor below. Leslie went first, maneuvering through the passage with ease. Tom followed, his movements steady and practiced. When it was 𝙂𝙤𝙣's turn, she hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. The walls felt solid beneath her hands, the texture rough but reliable. She positioned her feet carefully, keeping her body pressed between the rock faces as she moved forward, just as she had been instructed. The first few feet were manageable. Then, suddenly, her foot slipped. Gravity took over in an instant. The rock beneath her shifted slightly, offering no grip as she lost control. Her body tilted forward, and before she could catch herself, she was falling. The brief sensation of weightlessness ended abruptly as she crashed downward into a lower portion of the passage, slamming into an immovable rock spur that jutted from the left wall. Her ribs took the brunt of the impact, sending a sharp shockwave of pain through her chest. She slipped towards the cave wall, and her body became tightly wedged between the sloping right wall and the unyielding rock on the left, pressing sharply against her torso, with her body twisted awkwardly. The air was forced from her lungs. The cave had her now. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. A deep, stabbing sensation radiated from her ribs, spreading through her torso with every shallow breath. She tried to inhale, but the pressure on her chest made it feel as though an invisible weight was crushing her from all sides. The walls pressed in, unyielding and cold, their rough surfaces scraping against her body with every slight movement. Leslie and Tom watched everything unfold in helpless horror. 1 second, 𝙂𝙤𝙣 had been inching through the passage, carefully bracing herself against the walls. Next, she had slipped, her body twisting as gravity dragged her down into the lower section of the passage. Both of them scrambled forward. 𝙂𝙤𝙣 was wedged deep, her torso trapped between the sloping right wall and a jagged rock spur on the left. Her breathing was fast and shallow, each inhale sharp and uneven. Leslie tried to reach her first, shifting into position above, but there was no room to grab her properly. Tom wedged himself lower, testing the rock with his hands, trying to determine if there was any way to pull her out, but the cave had locked her in place with unrelenting force. The more she struggled, the worse her position became. Any attempt to move sent fresh waves of pain through her already battered body. The stone held firm, refusing to budge. The realization sent a surge of panic through her. She was trapped. Leslie looped a strap under 𝙂𝙤𝙣's shoulders and pulled with all her strength, but she didn't move. Tom attempted to dig at the rock with his fingers, searching for any weak points, but the formations were solid, immovable. They adjusted her position as much as they dared, but every slight shift made her gasp in pain. It was useless. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. The cave was utterly silent except for her ragged breathing. Her limbs began to tingle as circulation slowed, the pressure on her chest making it harder to pull in air. The thought crept in slowly, terrifying in its clarity. If she wasn't pulled out, she would never leave. The others had no choice but to leave her behind. Tom backed out of the passage and hurried toward the entrance, moving as fast as the cave allowed. Each second felt too slow, every obstacle another agonizing delay. Finally, he emerged into the open air, fumbling for his phone with shaking hands. The 911 dispatcher answered, and he forced himself to stay calm as he explained the situation. How deep they were, how badly she was trapped, how urgent it was. The response was immediate. The Bluefield Fire and Rescue Team was mobilized, bringing with them the tools that Leslie and Tom lacked. Inside the cave, 𝙂𝙤𝙣 remained pinned, each moment stretching into eternity. Leslie stayed with her, keeping the beam of her headlamp steady, watching for any change in her condition. The weight was unbearable. Time seemed to stretch, losing all meaning in the heavy darkness. The weight of the cave bore down on them, an oppressive reminder of just how small and powerless they were beneath the earth. Then, at last, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel. The rescuers had arrived. They wasted no time assessing the situation. Their headlamps flickered over 𝙂𝙤𝙣's twisted form, their faces grim as they examined the rock holding her in place. It was clear this would not be easy. They unpacked their tools, chisels, hammers, and webbing slings, and began working immediately. The first strike of the chisel sent a jolt through 𝙂𝙤𝙣's trapped body. The vibration of metal against stone radiated through her ribs like an electric shock. Again and again, they struck, breaking away tiny pieces of the rock that had imprisoned her. The process was agonizingly slow. Each blow sent painful reverberations through her bones, and she fought the urge to scream. The hammering continued, each strike inching her closer to freedom. The rescuers moved quickly, but the cave seemed unwilling to release her. Every fragment of rock chipped away felt like a battle won against the earth itself. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the stone finally relented. A crucial sliver broke free, and 𝙂𝙤𝙣 shifted, just slightly, but enough. Pain tore through her body as she was dragged free, every nerve screaming in protest. The sensation was unbearable, her limbs numb and useless from hours of compression. But she was moving, finally moving. The cave had lost its grip. Once clear, the rescuers wasted no time stabilizing her, checking for signs of more serious injury. She was too weak to stand, her legs barely responding. Her chest ached with every breath, her ribs raw from the unrelenting pressure they had endured. They carried her carefully through the tunnel, maneuvering past the same obstacles she had entered so easily that morning. Every inch closer to the exit felt unreal, as if she were floating in some disconnected state between exhaustion and relief. Then, finally, they emerged. Her legs barely held her weight, but even as she stood in the light, safe and breathing, she knew the cave had left its mark. The pressure of the rock, the suffocating silence, the feeling of being swallowed by the earth, it would never truly leave her.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna... Okay, come on. There we go. Alright. There we go.
This video is a 3-hour compilation of the worst human deaths. From astronauts who suffered painful deaths all the way to parents who were stabbed to death by their own daughter's boyfriend. Yeah, so let's just get right into it. Let's talk about some astronauts who suffered painful deaths. In, well, space of course. Starting with the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. This story is about a space shuttle that was supposed to return home safely, but instead became a disaster that burned the whole crew inside alive, where their bodies then smashed into the ground. Yeah, let's rewind to January 16th, 2003. Columbia, the oldest space shuttle in NASA's fleet, is sitting on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission, a scientific research flight. 7 astronauts were ready to do 80 experiments in space. They say they wanted to study what happens to microbiological processes in the absence of gravity. Whatever the hell that means. I like your little funny words, Magic Man. Anyways, let's get into who is actually on the space shuttle. First, we have Commander Rick Husband, a pilot who was well at the wheel. With him was pilot William McCool, and also mission specialist Michael Anderson. And then we have Ilan Ramon, who was Israel's first astronaut, and keep this in the back of your mind because it's really important. We also have Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, and Laurel Clark. This wasn't just any crew, these were some of the biggest, nerdiest, brainiest minds on the planet. Now, what exactly caused their painful deaths? It has been months of prep work, training, and planning until it was finally go time. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Blah, blah, you get the goddamn point. You guys have ever seen a rocket take off? I don't need to explain it to you. Well, during this launch, a piece of foam insulation from the big orange fuel tank actually broke off and struck Columbia's left wing. A bit of foam? What the hell, Box said? What? That's not a big deal. So you would think. But in the world of space travel, even the smallest inch can be a massive problem. Yes, size matters here. Now, here's the interesting part.
Oh my
NASA
God, come on.
engineers actually did in fact notice this. They saw the footage of the foam hitting the wing, but here's the thing. They didn't think it was that big of a deal. A piece of foam hitting a large metal rocket, I mean, who cares? Now, wait. I take that back because some of the engineers were concerned. They knew that if the heat-resistant tiles on the wing were damaged, it could mean a disaster during re-entry. I mean, when something flies into the atmosphere, if you guys didn't know this, it burns up like crazy. So they need all the protection they can get. But did anyone listen? Let's just say, not really. They asked for satellite images to assess the damage, but the request was denied. Yeah, denied. The higher-ups at NASA in charge of the safety inspections, or the mission management team, thought that the risk was low and they decided to carry on with the mission as planned. Hey, what's more expensive, the whole ship and crew or some satellite pictures, huh? Hey, it's tax dollars, who cares? Man, wait, what's that over there? Is that War Thunder? War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle into the video. For 16 days, the Columbia crew was busy
War
doing
Thunder
what
skips
astronauts
ad.
do best. Nerd. They were conducting experiments on everything from the behavior of flames in microgravity to how spiders spin webs in space. I mean, spiders in space? That's either the coolest goddamn thing I've ever heard, or it's either the creepiest. But yeah, they were up there doing their thing and the world watched. And for a while, it seemed like another successful NASA mission. Families of the astronauts were happy and excited, knowing that their loved ones up there were doing amazing and big things. And the rest of us, well, we're just happy to see some space stuff. I mean, you don't really get to see that every day. The ship did its thing, the astronauts performed their experiments, and talked to the ground. I'm sure while they were up there, they actually learned a lot about what happens in the lack of gravity and all that, you know, the nerd that my box brain is way too small to understand. But then, after 2 weeks of all going to plan, the worst happened. February 1st, 2003. Columbia was scheduled to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and land safely back at the Kennedy Space Center. But as the shuttle made its dive into the Earth, something went horribly wrong. And the crew actually noticed that something was going wrong. Colonel Rick Husband said on the mic, and I repeat, "Roger, Those were his last words. At 9 o'clock, as the shuttle entered the atmosphere, the damaged left wing allowed superheated air to penetrate the wing structure. The heat-resistant tiles, which were supposed to protect the shuttle, had been damaged from the deadly foam. And what happened next? The wing started to disintegrate, ripping apart and then... Yeah, you heard me correctly, and it was so fast, it was 18 times the speed of sound. That's not just fast, that's goddamn zooming. And to be torn apart at that speed, the destruction was almost instant. Almost too quick to even comprehend. I mean, guys, 1 minute they were coming home and the next, they were gone. Now hold on, how could this happen? How could NASA let this slip through the cracks? As you would expect, investigations began immediately. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board was formed to find out what went wrong. And whoo, did they find some things. The foam strike was identified as the cause of the disaster, but it was actually more than that. NASA itself had ignored the warnings and 7 innocent people paid the price. Not only that, but remember that Israeli astronaut, 𝙂𝙚𝙣𝙚𝙦? Well, him being on board made people think that this could have been a terrorist attack. No, seriously. Remember, this was shortly after 9/11, so America was terrified that that's what it was. But ladies and box heads, the investigation showed that the only terrorist here was the goddamn foam. Alright, now let's talk about Soyuz 11. This next one wasn't American. Remember in those early days, the space race was on between the Americans and the Soviets. June 1971, picture this. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union are neck and neck. Each trying to outdo the other with everything. And then we have Soyuz 11. A mission that was supposed to be a historic success, but turned into one of the most tragic events in space history. Maybe I should start saying space exploration history, because isn't like history everywhere in space? You know what I'm saying? I'm on a tangent. Let me set the stage for ya. The Soviet Union had already achieved the first satellite, the first human in space, you name it. They were kicking America in the goddamn Now they were about to pull off another first, manning the world's first space station, Salyut 1. Great, thought America. Before 11, the Soyuz 10 mission was a mission to attempt the docking before, but failed to dock with the station due to technical issues, and they returned home. Woohoo! Cheered the Americans as they f***ed it up. Soyuz 11 was the Soviet Union's second attempt at this. The plan was simple: dock with Salyut 1, spend a few weeks conducting scientific experiments, and return home as heroes of the motherland, comrades. It's our space shuttle, comrades. The crew of Soyuz 11 was 3 astronauts: Commander Georgy Dobrovolsky, flight engineer Viktor Patsayev, and research engineer Vladislav Volkov. These guys were the cream of the crop, or the vodka of the vodka? I don't really know what Russians do other than drink vodka. But then again, what does America do? I don't know. June 6th, 1971. Soyuz 11 approached the Salyut 1 station. They held their breath as they got closer. Tick, tock. Closer still. The moment of truth. The astronauts adjusted the module and got closer. Click. They had successfully docked with Salyut 1. This was a huge win for the Soviets. The crew entered the space station and began their mission. For 23 days, they conducted experiments on what happens to bone density when people stay in space for a while. They watched the Earth from the orbit, measured sun wavelengths from space, and even broadcasted for live TV from space. I mean, imagine going live from a space station in 1971. Like a goddamn 1970s Twitch stream. Hey, what's going on, chat? Today we're going to be doing a let's play of America in the space race. Thanks for the 3-month sub, Cuba. Really appreciate it.
Fucking
Anyways,
funny.
things weren't really all that smooth. Salyut 1
Imagine. Imagine doing a Twitch stream from space. Oh my god, that would be
had some
funny.
serious issues. Technical malfunctions, problems with air quality, you goddamn name it. First was the failed docking of the Soyuz 10. Then, once the crew of 11 were on board, they started noticing a weird smell. On the station, the filters were malfunctioning and causing a strange smell throughout the station, which is what they were smelling. More than that, the power supply kept going out, which was a constant issue with their experiments for measuring the sun's wavelengths. But the crew pushed on, determined to complete their mission. One thing the Russians are great at is pushing through some shitty goddamn conditions. Every country that's ever tried to invade them in the winter had a bad time. But then the time came to return home. June 29th, 1971. Soyuz 11 undocked from Salyut 1 and began its descension back to Earth. Everything seemed normal. The crew was calm, the spacecraft was functioning as expected, and the world was kicked back and watching from home. You know, watching them come back home. But then, during re-entry, the most dangerous time besides takeoff actually, things went horribly wrong. A loud sucking noise is heard. Air is rapidly sucked out. The men gasped for air. Come in, come in! Nothing. The rescue teams were on high alert and made their way to the module. What they found was absolutely horrifying. A cabin vent valve designed to equalize pressure when landing, which, by the way, don't worry, I didn't know what that was either, accidentally opened in the vacuum of space. Hey guys, you mind if I crack a window? God damn it, Jerry. In less than 30 seconds, all of the air in the capsule vented into space. The astronauts, without their pressure suits because, you know, no one expected the cabin to depressurize, were instantly exposed to the vacuum of space and died instantly. Now, let's just pause here for a second. Imagine that, sitting in a spacecraft thinking you're minutes away from home and then poof, all the air is gone just like this. As Soyuz 11 descended through the atmosphere, ground control tried to make contact with the crew, but there was no response, just silence. The capsule landed in Kazakhstan, and recovery teams rushed over to open it. The rescue teams opened the door, it slowly opened. The rescue teams looked inside. Oh my great heavens, one probably said. It was horrible. All 3 of the astronauts were dead. Strapped in their seats, their faces looked like frozen skeletons with their skin sucked to the bone, with obviously signs of suffocation from space. The Soviet Union was devastated. The loss of the astronauts was a blow not to just the space program, but to the nation as a whole. But Bach says, seriously, these guys gave their lives for the advancement of human knowledge, so to me, they're heroes. And again, most of us watching this video probably sit around on our couch and eat glue. These men are goddamn heroes. Now let's talk about the Challenger explosion. January 28th, 1986. Another group of American astronauts would die horribly. And on live TV, a day that many of our parents probably still remember. All of a bit too well. The Challenger mission was one of many shuttle missions that had become almost routine for NASA. No big deal, kickback, easy kind of stuff. This was supposed to be the 25th shuttle mission, and the first ever to include a regular civilian. What could go wrong there? And by the way, her name was 𝙂𝙚 𝙤𝙀. She was a school teacher that was supposed to be a part of the crew in space. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It sounds a bit crazy, I know. A teacher in space? What the? The idea was to show kids going to space was something you could aspire to do, no matter who you were. Oh, don't worry, NASA. After watching this video, I don't want to go to space anymore. I'm perfectly good on the ground. Anyways, let's talk about the crew of 7, who was Commander Francis R. Scobell.
That also brings a thought to me. Would it mean, since Earth is literally in space, wouldn't that mean we're in space all the time? Just a food for thought.
Pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, and Judith Resnick, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and of course, our teacher 𝙂𝙗 𝙂𝙁. Now let's talk about the build-up. So, the Challenger launch had already been delayed multiple times due to bad weather and technical issues. Should have just taken the message. And then, on the morning of January 28th, temperatures at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida had plummeted.
What can I say? Humans are stubborn.
To below freezing. Yeah, and if you live under a rock, Florida doesn't usually get that goddamn cold. So here's the thing, the cold was actually a big deal. The shuttle's solid rocket boosters were sealed with what are called O-rings. Yeah, I don't know what that means either, so let's take a look at the wiki, shall we? They're rubber gaskets that were supposed to prevent hot gases from escaping during the launch. For those that didn't know, the rockets get very warm. Some say they get to at least 100 degrees. But these O-rings weren't tested for such cold conditions. Yeah, none of these boys look great in the cold, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Bad time. Engineers from Morden Thiokol, the company that actually manufactured the boosters, were even goddamn concerned. They had warned NASA that the O-rings could fail in the cold. So, what did our trusty guys at NASA do? They probably debated, they probably yelled, discussed, and all in the end it didn't matter because they decided to go ahead with the launch. Bunch of nerds in a circle. Oh yeah, you're so smart? No, you're so smart. Nah, bro, close your eyes, bro. Okay, bro. What do you see, bro? Nothing, bro. That's my world without you, bro. That's probably how it went, bro. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is the nerds were under some pressure to keep to the schedule. The desire to maintain public and political support all played a role in the decision. So here we are, January 28th, 1987, 11:38 EST. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The world watched as Challenger lifted off into the clear blue sky. Families, friends, and millions of viewers were glued to their TVs, especially the students, eager to see a teacher, 𝙂𝙗 𝙂𝙁, make history. And well, because they're in this video, they definitely made history. For the first 73 seconds, everything seemed to be going according to plan. But then, at an altitude of 46,000 feet, something went horribly wrong. A plume of flame appeared, a sign that the O-rings had just failed. Just as the engineers had feared. The external fuel tank erupted. More flames and then kaboom! The world watched the disintegration of the entire shuttle. The Challenger exploded in a massive fireball. And all that was left were pieces of debris falling into the Atlantic Ocean. The entire crew was killed instantly. The crew compartment was seen tumbling through the sky. And then it was gone. Just like that. In an instant, 7 lives were lost. The Challenger disaster was broadcasted live, meaning millions of people, including children, witnessed the explosion in real time. Ask your parents about it, they will look like this guy right here. Not a pretty sight. In the hours and days that followed, the families of the crew were left to deal with the loss of their loved ones. President Ronald Reagan was scheduled to give his State of the Union address that evening, but instead, he addressed the nation about this tragedy. This was the exact quote, actually.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
NASA immediately grounded the shuttle program and launched an investigation into what actually went wrong. The Rogers Commission was formed, led by former Secretary of State William Rogers. The investigation revealed the O-rings had indeed failed, as the engineers had warned. The cold weather had allowed hot gases to escape and cause the explosion. But it wasn't just a technical failure. It was also a failure of management and communication. NASA had been warned, but those warnings were ignored once again. I mean, we're seeing a trend here. Richard Feynman, in his famous demonstration during the hearings, actually dipped an O-ring into a glass of ice water, which in fact showed how the rubber lost its flexibility in the cold. Oh, the audience. Okay, last one. So in the end, what came of all this? The Challenger disaster forced NASA to take a long, hard look at its practices, its culture, and its priorities. By the way, I forgot to mention the shuttle program was grounded for nearly 3 years. The disaster also led to changes in how risks were communicated and assessed within the organization. And before we move on to the next section, let's not forget that Krista McAuliffe was a civilian. She wasn't even supposed to be on the space shuttle. Gosh. Alright, next up we have Apollo 13. Now, I know the rest of the stories everyone died, but this one's a little bit different. Sue me if you think it's clickbait. April 1970. Apollo 11 had already made history by landing the first humans on the moon. Well, if it's real. And Apollo 12 followed with another
If it's real,
successful
oh my
moon
god.
landing. So, ladies and box heads, let's do a little bit of math. What's next? Apollo 13, of course. I mean, they did it twice before, so how hard could it really be? Okay, so Apollo 13 was supposed to be the third mission to land on the moon. You know, with actual people on it. The crew was Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. These guys were ready to explore the Fra Mauro region of the moon. Whatever that means, all of this is just moon to me. But what started as a scientific mission quickly turned into a fight for survival. April 11th, 1970, Apollo 13 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. 10, 9, blah blah blah, you get it. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But as you've probably guessed, things were about to go south. Not as bad as the other stories, cause those people died instantly. But it's still rough. Let's fast forward to April 13th, 1970. For the math impaired, that's 2 days into the mission. They were cruising through space and everything was chill. A vibe, as the youngins say nowadays.
Oh no.
Bang, an ocean tank in the service module exploded. And in case you didn't know, people need oxygen to
Survive.
Imagine sitting in a spaceship over 200,000 miles from Earth and suddenly hearing a loud bang. Not exactly the sound you want to hear when you're in the vacuum of space, right? Then again, was there a real bang? I thought there was no sound in space. Are they lying to us about this? Okay, well, regardless of how they detected it, the explosion crippled the spacecraft. The oxygen levels fell, the power dropped, and the crew was left in the dark. Literally. The moon landing, yeah, that was out the window. And hold on, this is where the famous line comes in.
Houston, we have a problem.
Okay, quick side note, the actual quote was,
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Let's
be real, this version has a better ring to it. Either way,
Yeah.
those words signaled the beginning of one of the most intense rescue missions
You can say this version has a better O ring to it.
in space history. So, here's the situation. 3 astronauts are now stranded in space. They have a damaged spacecraft and they're losing power, and with it, their air. It was a goddamn ticking time bomb up there. And the mission control team back in Houston had to figure out how to get these guys home alive. AAA doesn't do space coverage yet. We're not at that part of the business. Anyways, what was the first order of business? Figuring out how to use the lunar module, or for those who don't know what that is yet, it's what actually lands on the moon. Using that as a lifeboat. But that thing wasn't meant to support 3 people for a long period of time. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The crew shut down the command module to conserve power and moved into the LM. Now hold on, things weren't so bad to where it was time to eat a crew member yet, but you know, it was bad. It was cramped, cold, and the conditions were getting heavier. In a tiny spacecraft floating in the blackness of space, knowing that the smallest mistake could mean the difference between life and goddamn death. The crew had to navigate using only the stars and perform complex calculations by hand. Dude, I can't calculate my bills without a calculator. I died real quick up there. Mission Control, they were
Me too.
working, trying to come up with solutions to problems that they've never had to encounter before. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Okay, no, the LM's life support system was designed to filter out carbon dioxide, but it was only equipped to handle 2 astronauts for a short period. With 3 astronauts on board, the CO2 levels started to rise and fast. If you guys saw my K video, you'll see why a large group of people in an enclosed area is bad for breathing. The ground team had to come up with a way to fit a square peg in a round hole, literally. The command module had a square component for the airlines, and the lunar module had round ones. So what did they do? They used duct tape, plastic bags, and a sock to rig a device that would literally allow the square scrubbers to fit into the round holes. And guess what? It worked. The crew was able to bring the CO2 levels down to a safe level. I mean, duct tape and a sock saved these guys' lives. That's not all I do with tape and a sock.
Hey, yo, no.
But hold on, it doesn't stop there. The next challenge? Alright, that's getting back to Earth. With the CM shut down, the crew had to conserve every bit of power that they had for re-entry. They faced freezing temperatures, water shortages, and exhaustion. So basically just life in Michigan. They also had to manually adjust their course using the LM thrusters, making sure they hit the narrow re-entry that would bring them safely back to Earth. Too shallow and they'd skip off the atmosphere and be lost in space forever. Too steep and they'd burn up on re-entry. No pressure, right? Imagine the
Literal
intensity
pressure.
of the spacecraft, knowing that everything depended on this one maneuver. April 17th,
Okay, here we
1970,
go.
the moment of truth. Almost a week of this. The crew powered up the CM, hoping it would still.
Honestly, to be honest, I'm really happy how this is turning out. There could be improvements here and there, but like right now, I'm proud of my progress.
Work after days of being shut down. The space shuttle rattled, alarms beeped, fire all around. I mean, the module literally looked like a damn meteor. Comms go down during this process for longer than usual. Apollo, this is Mission Control. Do you read? Waiting for a signal, any sign that the crew was still alive. Nothing. And then, hello Houston, this is Odyssey. It's good to see ya. Woo! Applause in the Mission Control. They made it. The crew of Apollo 13 arrived back on Earth safely in the Pacific Ocean, where they were quickly picked up by recovery teams. And honestly, isn't that just beautiful? So what's the takeaway here? Apollo 13 didn't make it to the moon, but it succeeded in ways that no one thought they could. It showcased honestly the best of NASA, and I spent most of this video bashing NASA, but I don't want to get it twisted. I think NASA is a great organization, so I wanted to end off on a good note. These are some of the worst nuclear disasters that did irreversible damage to the world and brutally killed thousands of people. Yeah, starting off with the SL-1 reactor explosion of 1961, where a routine operation turned catastrophic once a control rod mishap triggered a massive power surge in just about 4 milliseconds, resulting in the brutal deaths of 3 young operators at the scene. January 3rd, 1961 at the SL-1 reactor in the great state of Idaho. No one has ever called Idaho great. Okay, that's besides the point. Okay, now the SL-1 was a miniature nuclear reactor. It was experimental, created for the US Army to prove that these reactors could provide heat and energy for their, remote military base locations. Anyways, the Christmas and 1961 New Year holiday breaks had just come to an end after 11 days. And during this time, the reactor had been shut off for, maintenance. So, operators are returning to the reactor to power it back on. These operators were 3 young men, all in their 20s, who were more or less inexperienced, having only worked at the plant for about, a couple of months. And one of them for only
Sounds
just
like a
3
disaster.
weeks. These men were 27-year-old Richard McKinley, 22-year-old John Burns, and 26-year-old Richard Legg. So yeah, these guys are tasked with powering the reactor back on. To do this, they have to manually lift the center control rod of the reactor exactly 4 inches. And no more than that. Look, 4 inches is enough, guys. Trust me here. Anyways, if they were for some reason to pull the
Hello,
control
how are
rod
you?
further than that, well, as we'll know soon, there could be an insanely dramatic power surge
Currently
that could
drawing.
easily kill all of them in a second. The nuclear core would vaporize, control rods would shoot out of the vessel, and extremely pressurized radioactive water would fire out of the vessel at insane speeds. Not really a survivable situation. The men clock into work, but not in the best headspace. 2 of the operators, Richard Legg and John Burns, weren't exactly that friendly with each other. They apparently had some previous issues outside of work, which led to some fistfights. So it's safe to assume they weren't all smiles and jolly when working together. And Richard McKinley wasn't exactly comfortable working with nuclear technology yet. Like I said earlier, at this point he was still a trainee at the reactor, having only been there for, again, 3 damn weeks. Man, I got talking stages that last longer than 3 damn weeks. Not to mention that night, John Burns had literally gotten a phone call from his wife asking for a divorce. Oh, good golly. This guy was not having a good day. So yeah, these guys all seemed totally ready to carry out this super risky and dangerous job that could literally mutilate their bodies in seconds, if not completed properly. They have a nice long list of tasks to complete as a part of powering the reactor back on, before the most important part, pulling out the damn rod. So when the clock strikes 9 p.m, completely exhausted, they make their way over to above the rods. John Burns would have the honor of pulling out, something I clearly never do. Okay,
Bruh.
hey, I'm done. Now Burns crutches down, preparing to lift the 80-pound rod. Richard Legg stands directly next to him, watching Burns and making sure nothing goes wrong. Needless to say, this guy's useless. Meanwhile, a nervous Richard McKinley stands off to the side. He paces in place as the other guys are near the rods. Remember, he's all new to this. He still feels uncomfortable with everything and is now worried something is gonna go wrong. 9:01 p.m. John Burns is hunched down, slowly lifting the heavy control rod upwards. Remember, 4 inches only. Anything past that is a death sentence, and all the men in the goddamn room knew it. He's lifting it, clank. The rod is goddamn stuck, which surprisingly happens quite a lot at this reactor. Hey, leggy boy, I can't move it, it's stuck. Well, then pull on the damn thing, ya boxhead. Remember, these guys hate each other? Their conversations probably went something like that. Anyways, so Burns continues to pull at the rod, this time with much more force, and probably without much care. He yanks on the control rod and it comes unstuck. But it's lifted way more than just 4 inches. Before the men even realize what happened,
RIP.
within just 4 milliseconds, the mutilated bodies of 3 men are suddenly laying on the ground and even on the ceiling. John Burns died instantly as he was thrown into a surface with such a force that his chest was fractured and a rib impaled his heart. Richard Legg had it the worst. His body was pinned to the damn ceiling. A control rod had flown out of the reactor vessel and struck Legg in his damn abdomen. With so much speed and power, the rod flew up to the ceiling while Legg was stuck up there, instantly killing him. Richard McKinley lays in a pool of blood as his hands and the right side of his face are completely blown off his body. Shockingly enough, he had survived the initial blast, but just barely. Unfortunately, he would die just a couple hours after the explosion. So what the hell just happened? How are these men dead and one barely alive within just 4 milliseconds? Well, when Burns lifted the control rod too far, the power within the core of the reactor surged to 10 million% more than typically operational. This caused the core of the SL-1 reactor to melt and vaporize instantly. A pressure wave is produced inside the core and blasts upwards with extreme force. The top of the reactor vessel is struck with the pressure of 10,000 pounds per square inch. Now, the entire 26,000-pound reactor vessel is shot upwards at a crazy speed, lifting the entire rig out of the floor and up to 9 feet in the goddamn air. The control rods are all shot out of the vessel and towards the ceiling at 85 feet per second, which is exactly what impales and causes the death of Richard Legg. The heavily pressurized water and steam then shot out of the 6 holes in the reactor vessel, ultimately covering the whole room in radioactive debris from the damaged nuclear core. It was later determined that the force of this explosion was equivalent to about 70 pounds of TNT, all of which was blown right into the men's bodies, all within 4 milliseconds. Specific alarm patterns notify a group of firefighters about 8 miles away that something has gone wrong at the SL-1 reactor. But these guys were not worried at all. They have already visited the reactor twice that evening as a result of false alarms. At 9:10 p.m., the firefighters show up without any real sense of urgency. They make their way towards the gates of the reactor when they notice that the radiation detectors are going crazy. To be safe, they put on some radioactive protective gear and enter the reactor building stairway. At 9:17 p.m., again, the radiation detector is blaring. With each step up the stairs, the detector ticks louder and louder. And still, these firefighters aren't taking this whole situation too seriously. They think that something must be wrong with the detector, so they go back downstairs to get a different one. Because, like, what could have possibly gone wrong at the reactor? Woo, boy, they're about to find out. The firefighters continue up the stairs and take a look around the corner and into the room. To their absolute horror, they saw the aftermath of the awful explosion that had occurred less than 20 minutes before, but no operators in sight. They now know that this situation wasn't to be taken lightly. Because of the incredibly high radiation levels, the firefighters couldn't enter the room just yet. They needed to retreat and think of a plan. They needed to be smart about how to approach this. At 10:45 p.m., they decide that each person can enter the building just once, and only for a maximum of 60 seconds. So, the first team of firefighters make their way up the stairs and quickly into the room of the explosion. Without even having time to express their disgust of the scene, they see the mutilated bodies of Burns and the somewhat alive McKinley. They were drenched in water, which happened to be incredibly contaminated by the radiation. Without hesitation, the firefighters put the men's bodies on stretchers and carried them out. Just 15 minutes later, at around 11 p.m., Richard McKinley succumbed to his terrible wounds and was pronounced dead. And what about Richard Legg? You know, the one on the ceiling. While Legg's body was so unrecognizable and mutilated that the firefighters initially thought that it was a pile of rags on the ceiling. To their shock, they eventually realized it was an actual person. Legg's body was going to be an incredibly tough recovery. Since it was pinned above the ceiling directly above the reactor core, the firefighters actually feared that the body could easily drop into the damaged core, which would result in the body being absolutely covered in a huge amount of radiation, creating a whole different problem. So, they let Legg's body hang on the ceiling for another 6 days. It wasn't until they gathered a group of 10 men with special tools to go in and recover his body. They took long poles with sharp hooks on the end into the room, ready to finally bring him down. With caution, the men were incredibly careful not to mess this whole ordeal up. They pierced Legg's body with the hooks and let the lifeless clump of body parts fall onto a stretcher below. The bodies of the 3 unfortunate men were placed in lead-lined caskets inside of metal drums and buried in the Idaho desert, basically in the middle of goddamn nowhere. And what about the reactor? After the incident, most of the radiation had thankfully been contained inside the reactor building. This allowed for a much easier cleanup than if it, hadn't. They removed the reactor vessel from the building and cleaned the whole place up. If this material hadn't been buried deep underground, it posed the risk of infecting nearby people with acute radiation sickness, something that can easily kill a human within days or even years, depending on the amount of exposure. Next up, we have the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, the most damaging and devastating nuclear catastrophe ever. But did you know there was so much destruction and painful deaths that the Soviet government actually tried to hide it from the rest of the world? But before we get into the brutal aftermath of this disaster, let me first explain exactly how it happened. April 25th, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located in the Soviet Union, or what we consider present.
Hey, fun fact about the Chernobyl disaster. Every time it is mentioned, people think it is the nuclear disaster from Japan, but no, it's not.
Present-day Ukraine. Anyways, the Chernobyl power plant had 4 nuclear reactors that generated electricity for the surrounding areas. And like any other machine in a facility like this, these reactors had to pass routine safety tests. So at around 1 a.m., the power plant operators reduced the power in reactor 4 to perform a scheduled safety test. The point of this was to see if the plant's turbines could produce enough electricity to keep coolant pumps running. That is, before emergency generators turn on in case a power outage occurs. Confusing, I know. Basically, they just needed to ensure the reactors would continue to operate during a power failure. Little did these workers know that in about 24 hours, their safety test would go on to cause insanely painful and agonizing deaths for some unlucky people. Flash forward about 13 hours later at 2 p.m. The plant operators turn off the emergency core cooling system in reactor 4 in preparation for that safety test. Another 11 hours go by, and at around 1 a.m. on April 26th, 1986, things start to get real interesting. The power levels in reactor 4 have suddenly plummeted, like way below what's usually considered stable. So what do the operators do to fix this and bring the levels back up? Well, they remove most of the control rods from the reactor's core and turn off the emergency safety features. A big, huge, box head level dangerous mistake. You would think that they would have called off the test back when they realized something was wrong with the power levels, right? Well, clearly they didn't. The operators were instructed to keep it going. So, just about 20 minutes later at 1:23 a.m., an unexpected power surge suddenly occurs, causing the power levels in reactor 4 to skyrocket to dangerously high levels. And when this happens, the core of the reactor increases in temperature at incredibly fast pace. And well, overheated the core, which equals a nuclear meltdown, people. Immediately, an operator takes action and quickly slams his hands down on the emergency shutdown button, hoping to prevent an incoming disaster. This button would drop control rods into the reactor, stopping any nuclear reactions. However, these control rods get jammed as they enter the reactor's core, allowing for the nuclear reactions to actually continue to occur. The operators completely lose control of the coolant and, well, the entire goddamn situation. Temperatures inside the reactor's core soar to extreme levels. The insane heat begins to melt the core, and then just seconds later, Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl power plant explodes twice. But oh no, these aren't your typical explosions. These are explosions that will literally affect the world for thousands of years. The whole reactor crumbles in an instant. The 1,000-ton steel lid of the reactor is completely blown off. A literal fireball is then blasted into the sky as 8 tons of radioactive debris is scattered into the atmosphere. Dozens of fire ignite, and thick, dark clouds of graphite and radiation are spilling into the air. Not to mention, this blast kills 2 plant workers who happen to be near the reactor, like immediately. So yeah, not really an ideal situation. Just 5 minutes after the explosions, firefighters show up ready to extinguish the fires that were ignited during the blast. But these brave firefighters were completely unaware of what was really happening at the power plant. They had no idea that they were walking into an extremely toxic nuclear disaster with radiation that could kill them everywhere. They showed up in their typical firefighting outfits. Yep, these guys were getting up close and personal with fires at the reactor with zero gear that protected them from the radiation. And over the next few weeks, a couple dozen of these firefighters would die in agony from acute radiation poisoning. Their skin burned and blistered while bacteria literally ate them from the inside out. Their burning red skin peeled off their bodies at the slightest touch. Yeah, ouch. One even died because of cardiac arrest. And guys, what about the citizens of the towns that were near the explosion? Well, the closest civilization to the power plant was the town of Pripyat, just less than 2 miles away. And remember how I said that the Soviet government wanted to keep this whole nuclear disaster thing a secret? They were so paranoid of the information about the catastrophe leaking that they refused to tell anyone anything, including the surrounding areas and towns that were in danger of radiation poisoning.
Bruh.
Pripyat was the prime example. These poor people weren't informed of the atomic disaster until 36 hours after the goddamn meltdown. Yup, a whole day and a half later. The radiation levels from the blast were astronomically high in the town of Pripyat. Like, way too high for anyone to continue living there. Each second that they spent in that town, the higher the radiation levels were, reaching 180 to 300 milliroentgens, which is a way of measuring radiation. And as we know, radiation exposure and the human body don't mix well, especially long term. Nearly 20,000 cases of thyroid cancer were developed years after in people who just lived in Ukraine or Belarus. The Soviet government literally kept these people in danger just to try and save their own ass. Eventually, Soviet officers came to their senses and realized that they have to evacuate the damn place. About 38 hours after the disaster, evacuation began in the area that was within 30 kilometers of the power plant. A whopping 115,000 people were evacuated from these areas. Almost 50,000 of these people from the town of Pripyat. Over the town's loudspeakers, residents were told to only bring important documents and personal necessities because it would only be a temporary evacuation. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. Because flash forward to present day, Pripyat is still completely abandoned. No, seriously, Boxheads, the radiation levels are still so high that the area won't be habitable to humans for another 20,000 years. Temporary evacuation, yeah, my box butt. Anyway, if the Soviets were so top secret about this accident, how in the hell did the rest of the world figure out what happened? How is Boxhead making this video right now? Well, it's actually pretty crazy how people found out. The radiation from the explosions was so spread across Europe that it actually reached multiple different countries, specifically in northern Sweden. The Swedes eventually figured out that it wasn't an issue on their end. They investigated and discovered that the only plausible reason for the high radiation was because of their neighbors to the east, the Soviets. So, the Soviet government finally fessed up about their nuclear accident, but without really telling the whole truth. They tried to downplay the whole situation, claiming that there was just a damage to a reactor at the Chernobyl power plant, and that it was all under control. Well, the Soviets had no choice but to draft hundreds of thousands of civilians and military personnel into a risky cleanup crew. And guys, the number of workers was recorded to reach up to 800,000. These guys were called the liquidators. They basically went in and bulldozed infected villages and structures, removed contaminated materials, and cleaned up the foods left in abandoned towns to, prevent the outbreaks of diseases. Anything that required working in or near the Chernobyl power plant categorized you as one of these workers. Only 4,000 out of the estimated 800,000 workers ever died from direct causes of their liquidating work. Radiation exposure, cancer, the big ones. Next up, we have the Fukushima Daiichi disaster of 2011. This next catastrophic nuclear disaster was actually triggered by a record-breaking earthquake. March 11th, 2011 is a day that starts off like any other in the country of Japan. People are at work, kids are at school, everything's fine. But what no one realizes is that this same day would be the start of the country's most tragic disaster ever. At 2:46 p.m., a deep rumble can be felt beneath the earth. The ground starts shaking violently. Buildings are swaying and trembling. As everyone knows by now, an earthquake is hitting their country. People around the country are suddenly bracing for impact through a completely unexpected and incredibly strong earthquake. The ground intensely shakes for 6 consecutive minutes. as civilians are taking cover and attempting to keep themselves out of harm's way. Once those 6 minutes finally pass, the people of Japan are unaware that they just lived through one of the most powerful ever recorded earthquakes in their country's history. And for my nerds out there,
A
it's
head
actually
shake.
the 4th strongest in the whole world. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake. In case you don't know, that is insanely strong. So, not even an hour later, this super powerful earthquake triggers another natural disaster. This time, it's a tsunami. A massive, huge big tsunami. This tsunami sent waves that reached up to 50 goddamn feet directly onto the island of Japan. Imagine that. People are just starting to clean up the aftermath of one horrible disaster, just to look up and see a near 50-foot wave barreling straight towards them. These powerful waves swept up everything in their path and caused incredible amounts of destruction. The wave traveled 6 miles inland, completely obliterating buildings and entire towns in its way. And the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami was not pretty at all. Well, over 100,000 buildings were destroyed, debris filled the land that people once considered a home, and many innocent people, mainly the elderly, died tragic deaths. Over 19,000 people lost their lives as a result of these horrible tragedies. But hold on, let's flash back in time just a little bit. Once the earthquake hits the country, the operators at the Fukushima power plant are worried. Well, duh, of course, but not like how you would expect them to be. So the power plant initiates its routine procedure of what to do when an earthquake occurs. It shuts down the main reactor so the plant isn't operational during the earthquake. As you can probably imagine, it would be incredibly risky to run a nuclear plant while a whole freaking island is shaking uncontrollably. So, from the shutdown, the plant loses power as expected, and the emergency generators at the very bottom of the plant turn on. These generators are now tasked with providing enough power to continue moving around water in the plant. This water has a very important job to cool the nuclear reactors. And if the reactors don't get cooled, well, they'll overheat to insanely hot temperatures and leave us with what we call a nuclear meltdown. Anyways, the emergency generators are on and everything is running perfectly fine. The safety procedures at the plant are a success and are able to withstand the earthquake.
Hey chat, can anyone count how many times nuclear meltdown has been mentioned?
Everyone in the plant probably feels a huge sense of relief. They can finally take a breath and calm down after experiencing a pretty scary earthquake. They're glad to be breathing and are ready to move on with the rest of their day. But those sighs of relief are about to turn into terrified screams real damn quick. Because as the workers look out the window of the power plant, their smiles drop. A massive ocean wave can be seen in the distance. And like I mentioned earlier, it was a near 50-foot above sea level wave. And that monster was headed straight towards the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Damn, that was a mouthful. You can only imagine just how horrified these workers were, because to make things worse, they knew that there was no way of protecting the plant from the tsunami. They had no more safety regulations to attempt or any time to prepare. And as it approaches, it's clear that this wave absolutely towers over the seawalls that are supposed to protect the power plant from the ocean. Like seriously, it almost doubles them in height. The workers and probably everyone else in the area watches as the giant wave easily powers and slams into the seawall. There is nothing that anyone can do to prevent this massive wave from causing destruction. The wave then wastes no time sending an enormous amount of water rushing straight towards the power plant. The water reaches the plant not long after. With a crazy amount of force, the tsunami crushes into the plant. Whoosh! The water instantly surrounds the site, drowning the whole place in a massive flood. People are horrified inside as they have no idea what to do. Hell, there's nothing they can do. And remember how the emergency generators were at the very bottom of the plant?
Oofers.
When the water first slams into the plant and pours into the basement, the generators flood and fail immediately. The workers inside are suddenly met with a
Can we start putting generators at the top of the building, like at the rooftop?
power outage. Every room in the plant turns off from lots of light and tech stuff to completely pitch black. Imagine the fear from the operators, sitting in a dark room, their buildings are surrounded by water, knowing a nuclear disaster is bound to happen and they're cooped up in the middle. And the worst part is that no power for the generators means no water being moved around for the plant to be cooling. Knowing the potential dangers of an incoming nuclear emergency, the Japanese government orders all workers in the power plant to evacuate immediately. People's concern with the power plant is growing by the second. After being struck by two awful natural disasters earlier in the day, no one has any idea how much destruction this incoming nuclear disaster could cause. But they're definitely preparing for the worst, which is good. The government decided that all civilians within a 2-kilometer radius of the plant must evacuate, or else they would be in immediate radiation danger. And later it became a 10-kilometer radius, and then it became a 20-kilometer radius. Approximately 154,000 people are forced to evacuate their homes near the plant. People quickly pack up whatever they can bring with them and leave their whole lives behind. Terrified and clueless, they have no choice but to listen to the government's orders. On the national broadcasts and radio stations, Japanese government officials announced to the country that a nuclear emergency has been declared. Anyways, inside the reactors over the next few days, temperatures are rising to extreme levels of heat without any cooling. In reactor 1 specifically, temperatures reach 5,070 degrees Fahrenheit. And hold on, Boxhead, let me put that into some perspective for you. That's half the temperature of the damn sun. Yeah, I just said that. The damn sun. Steam pressure is produced in the reactors, forcing the water levels to drastically drop and creating hydrogen inside. While all of this is going on, nuclear waste is being released into the atmosphere from the melting down reactors. Chemical reactions are forming inside the reactors, and it's nothing but bad news. Because one day later, on March 12th at 3:56 p.m., a massive hydrogen explosion suddenly ignites, blowing the roof off of reactor number 1. A massive hydrogen explosion suddenly ignites, blowing the roof off of reactor number 1. Huge clouds of gray smoke rapidly grow from the explosion and fill the atmosphere. The hydrogen that was created inside had combined with the oxygen outside,
how are you?
causing almost like a hydrogen bomb explosion. Oh, don't believe me? I mean, take a look your damn self. At this point, everyone is hoping that this nightmare of a week is finally over. But still, somehow these people were wrong. Because flash forward another 2 days, on March 14th at 11:01 a.m., now reactor number 3 has exploded as well. The roof and the top part of the reactor are blown off as another hydrogen explosion takes place. The reactor is destroyed and more radiation is blown into the environment. What about the other reactors at the plant? Well, on March 15th at 6:15 a.m., reactor number 2 suffers what would have been an explosion just like the previous two. However, scared of the fact that another harmful explosion would occur and throw more radiation into the air, the staff at the plant quickly decided to open a panel in the reactor. Basically, it vented out the hydrogen before another explosion could occur. But this came at a price. Their ventilation actually allowed for more and more dangerous radiation to be let out into the environment. Because of the power plant disaster, radiation levels around Japan were rapidly increasing. But thank God they never reached a level high enough to provoke life-threatening health issues. But still, people had no choice but to leave behind their belongings and their homes. Anything they ever knew. Most of them ended up in shelters, and unfortunately some died from the non-nuclear disaster causes. Now, out of this whole video, this is the part that really gets me. Approximately 2,000 people died as a result from the stress of their incredibly tough lives. Yeah, nothing but stress killed these people. We're diving into caves where the people who went into them died horribly. This first one is actually not that known, and it's the Ellison cave tragedy. Only a few hours from the cave is the University of Florida in Gainesville. And 10 students went up to the cave on February 12th, 2011. Because hey, who needs a beer and partying in a college town in Gainesville when you could just go sit in a rock tube? I seriously don't get people. The group consisted of 5 boys and 5 girls, 2 of which were Grant Lockenbach, who was 20, and Michael Peary, who was 18 years old, who would never come out of the cave again. Another fun fact you should probably know about this cave, it's considered the deepest cave in the US. With the pit so deep, they call it the Fantastic Pit, and it's almost 600 feet deep. Kinda like your girlfriend after she hangs out with the guy she told you not to worry about. Sorry, box
Oh
heads.
god.
Someone had to tell you. Anyways, the group parks the car at the base of the mountain. And by the way, Allison's Cave is located in Georgia, USA.
Alright. Fucking done. Fucking and whew. I'm happy with the progress. I'm happy with the progress made here. But yeah, chat. I am happy with how this has how this has concluded. Well, not concluded, but so far the progress of this art piece. Again, to explain, at first this was supposed to be a generic character design challenge. They design a a librarian. So I thought maybe he's like witchy librarian and whatnot. And then and then I saw like a dress on while googling, well, not googling, blah blah blah. I should stop calling it that. While searching up some ideas on what to design for them. And the particular dress I saw, it was originally a child's dress, but anyways, the design of it reminded me of the Omnitrix from Ben 10. So like, huh, what if there's an alternate universe where uh Ben was like a wizard or a witch, whatnot, and then it devolved to what if it was gender swap Ben 10 with witch, and then yeah, and then we pretty much got so far this. She's pretty worried and whatnot, and worried or more than concerned on what to do. She's more of like I guess like reserved one, or more say anxious. She's more anxious. And basically calling this the witch tricks. I guess purposely kind of combining Ben 10K's Ben 10K's alien ability to transform or just alter his body in a way he doesn't actually transform into an alien. Combining Alien Force Ben 10K with Omniverse Ben 10K with classic Ben 10K, pretty much every Ben 10K. While keeping the classic Omnitrix design, which because it is a classic, it is nostalgic, because why not? And yeah, I kind of had these kind of clothy, racy, kind of like make it as witchy as possible. You know, I could have done like a better design for it. But at the same time, it is the Omnitrix. It is the Omnitrix, of course. Anywho, at this point, I'm just gonna uh once again, I'm just gonna end it off here. Getting pretty happy with how it turned out. And anyways, I just want to ask if y'all like this Dynasty version, and I call it Gen 10, like Jennifer. I was gonna go with that, like a reference to uh Generator Ben 10 Generator Heroes United or Ben Gen 10. But I should as for the Ben 10 community, I call the gender swap Ben Gen 10. So like yeah, Gen 10. This version Gen 10 is like a witch, whatnot. I'm not sure how the aliens would look. Kind of like more mysterious, more fantasy, more like just magical. I don't know, but kind of like a mix of Ben's classic aliens with kind of like your average fantasy witch stuff, and Gwen's anodite powers and whatnot. Anywho, I want to say just thank you everyone for joining today's stream. My name is 𝙂𝙚𝙣𝙚. I'm a variety streamer. I stream lots of video games, chat studios me, as well as draw art, program, and soon, I'm guessing soon or maybe later, like later, probably the beginning of next year, I'll start streaming 3D modeling with Blender. I just want to get used to the controls and the UI of Blender, and I am taking a course to learn how to do that, 3D model. And I've taken some approach to what I started yesterday or the other day with programming. Is just going through the lesson, like following through the lesson first, and then try recreating each of the programs myself, like through from memory, and then like figure out if I messed up something and whatnot. And sometimes I do mess up while trying to learn, and I spend like 30 minutes trying to figure out what went wrong. Anywho, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out so far. And I hope everyone is having a good day, evening, night, or time zone. Make sure you eat, make sure you hydrate, make sure you relax and calm, and just take a deep breath, chat. All right, take a deep breath. You're all good girls, good boys, and good creatures. You're all my blitz. Anywho, I'm gonna just take the rest of the night to just relax and chill and whatnot. And that being said, I hope everyone has had a good time with the stream, and enjoyed watching me draw, as well as listening to cave incidents and whatnot. Anywho, I gotta get going now, Blitzies. Bye bye, Matinee.